Welcome to Theological Grazing.
I read through Aristotle's Politics again recently with a reading group that I'm a part of. And so this is going to lead to several different podcasts, I think, dealing with some of the things that stuck out to me or that I was contemplating thinking about while reading this. And first, the first thing that I wrote down that I thought would be fun to talk about is something that stuck out to me early on in the Politics when Aristotle's talking about the household. And it's interesting that he organizes the household the same way that Paul does, right? There is the same understanding of the household. It is parents and children and slaves and masters and husbands and wives. And he does it in the order of slaves, masters, husbands, wives, parents, children. So it's interesting that Paul reverses this order. The slave master is not actually the kind of head of the household in the way that Paul uses it. That's just a little interesting tidbit. But what I want to talk about is when he's speaking of slaves, Aristotle speaks of two different kinds of slaves. He speaks of household slaves, and he speaks of production slaves. When we think of slaves, we basically only think of what I think, if I remember right, Aristotle called production slaves. This would be like, the slaves picking cotton in the South, right? They are a tool. They are a means to an end in that way, and their end is simply production. It's simply to go and do this act, this role. You could think of it today. And so maybe I should say that one of the ways that I interpret this and think about this is I want to apply it to today as much as is possible. And I know it's not the exact same situation, but I do think that there is overlap for somebody who is working for a modern corporation, oftentimes, somebody who does not own the productive enterprise, but they work for the one that owns the productive enterprise. I think that there's overlap between kind of the ancient conception of slavery and that in modern times. It's not exact, so it's analogical to a point. I'm not saying that every detail is the same. I'm not saying that we don't have more freedoms today, even when we're in that position. But in the end, if you're working for some kind of large corporation that you don't own, well, you are dependent upon someone else's household, someone else's family for your sustenance, for your livelihood. And I think that there is overlap in this way. And so I think about it in modern terms. And because I think about it in modern terms, when Aristotle distinguishes the household and production slave, this is kind of where it made me go. And is this completely right? I don't know. I asked one Aristotle scholar, and he said it seems to be kind of moving in the right direction anyway. And so I'll start with that, and then maybe I can have some more conversations down the line. I'm really hoping, actually, that I can take a course on Aristotle with the Davenant Institute at some point, because I'm very interested in that, but I don't know if that'll happen. So to back up to where I was before that long tangent, in today's world, I think that a production slave, you could see this as perhaps somebody on like an assembly line, right? You are a piece in this overall machinery where you do your part, you do this thing, but I mean, your purpose is producing something. That's your purpose. It's really not greater than that. Whereas Aristotle speaks of a household slave as one whose actions are directed toward, they have an end, a telos of the household and the good and overall well-being of the household. And so their focus is not purely on production. They are not just an instrument of production, he says. Rather, their goal is that they would produce the best life, the most well-being for the household. And that's going to take different forms. It's going to look different. It's going to change at different times. And this conception just made me think about our modern time and how, there's a lot of talk right now about the need for universal basic income, because with the increase of AI and mechanization, people think that there's going to be this massive move away from needing people, right? We're going to need so few people in work. Now, what's interesting is, it's always assumed that there's going to be a lot of kind of blue collar jobs that are going to be taken for this reason, a lot of assembly line type things. Whereas it's probably more true that a lot of the more managerial type roles will be taken over when it comes to, having something like AI. A lot of the middlemen positions, a lot of the things where you need just a lot of information as opposed to hard physical labor. But that's beside the point right now. When there's this concern that, we're going to have these massive layoffs, there's not going to be enough work for people, what are we going to do? Well, we need something like universal basic income. We just, the rich just pay the poor basically to just be content and not work. This is, I think, a foolish idea for many reasons. But one of the things I thought while reading Aristotle is this is only a problem because our conception of work is much more like that of a master who had slaves for the purpose of production. Right? These slaves, their purpose is just making this thing for me. It's just, harvesting this crop for me. They are a tool, an instrument for that purpose. Whereas if we had a more household-centered economy, if there were far more, kind of family businesses that were either smaller in scale, probably a lot of that, but also even when it's larger in scale, but with the mindset that still those working for you are there for a greater purpose than simply to produce something for you, right? It's a little bit bigger than that. If we had that mindset, then, and which I think is more in line with this idea of a household slave rather than a slave as an instrument for production, then all of a sudden we're not worried about laying people off because there's not work for them, because there's always work. There's always something more. There's always something that can benefit the household, right? There's always something that can add to the well-being of a household. And if somebody was working in a way that was focused on that. So here's where my mind went. Again, don't think slavery, right? This is a little bit different. This is analogical. But you think about, if somebody worked for, a small family farm, it's not their family, right? This is someone else's family, but they work for that farm and they've kind of devoted themselves to helping on that farm. Well, say that some kind of mechanized process comes along that takes away some of their role. It doesn't really matter, because there's always something else that person can do to benefit the household. There's always something. Now, it might look different. It might not be, the same kind of production. I think there's some good even in, some mechanization to take away some of the labor that is not as fulfilling. I've talked about this idea of soul destroying versus soul enriching work. There are things that are they're kind of soul destroying. And if we can find a way to, cover those roles, that's a good thing. That I think in the end that will be really good for people. But just thinking about how, this whole concern about universal basic income and, having the masses out of work. That's only a problem because the masses, by and large, have been treated like slaves of production. They've been treated as purely this means to an end that is not even, it's not an end in itself, like the well-being of the family. It is so much less than that. And if we had a much more human way of working and hiring people, and I think you see this in various small businesses or family-owned businesses, where there is a greater desire to see somebody fulfilled in what they're doing, and you want them to enjoy and benefit from what they're doing that also benefits you. This, I think, would remove a lot of these modern concerns.
Well, that's all, folks. If you could help me out, rate and review this podcast, share it with a friend, go ahead and email me if you have any questions. We're out.